They threw a veteran and his loyal dog into a deadly -20 degrees Fahrenheit blizzard, but what he built in the dark shocked the entire town. On the coldest night Red Valley had seen in decades, Logan Brooks and his canine partner Shadow were cast out into the freezing wilderness with nowhere to go. No shelter, no help, no second chances. But in the heart of that storm, they discovered an abandoned railcar, forgotten by everyone, except fate. What happened next would save lives, expose the truth, and redefine what home means. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? The door slammed behind Logan Brooks so hard the frame shook, and for a heartbeat, he wondered if the old cabin might tear itself apart from the force. But it was the silence afterward that cut deeper. The silence of a man who had just lost the last warm place he had left in this world. Snow blew sideways across the yard, the wind screaming against the walls as if trying to warn him to run, to hide, to disappear before the cold finished what the world had started. Shadow pressed against his leg, the black and tan shepherd's breath puffing in desperate white clouds. Logan steadied himself with a hand on the dog's collar. The tremor in his fingers wasn't from the cold alone. -20 degrees Fahrenheit could freeze any man, but what crawled up his spine came from somewhere deeper, somewhere older, carved into him by nights he didn't talk about, nights he wished he could forget. Behind the frosted window, Earl Dempsey's shadow lurched back toward the warmth of the wood stove, bottle still in hand. "Get off my land!" he had screamed moments earlier, spit flying, his face red with drink. "You ain't right in the head, Brooks. I ain't keeping a crazy veteran under my roof. Not when you snap on me like that." Logan hadn't snapped. Not in the way Earl thought. He had simply frozen when Earl grabbed his arm, flashbacks tightening around him like iron bands, sucking the air from his lungs. The world had gone silent. His heartbeat had thundered like incoming rounds. Then Earl's voice had blasted him back to the present, furious and terrified at the same time. And now here he was, outside, banished. Snow already crusting on his shoulders. Shadow nudged him, letting out a low whine. Logan kneeled automatically, burying a hand in the thick fur of his partner, grounding himself the way he had been taught during recovery. Slow breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Focus on what is real, focus on what is here. "I'm okay, buddy," he whispered, though they both knew it wasn't true. "We're okay. We just need to think." The wind howled back as if mocking him. It didn't matter that he had worked 3 months straight on Earl's ranch, repairing fences, feeding cattle, splitting wood, doing anything to earn a little pay and a temporary roof. To Earl, Logan's service overseas made him unpredictable, dangerous, a problem waiting to happen. And tonight, when Earl had been drinking from noon until dusk, the smallest misunderstanding had exploded into this moment. Logan pulled his thin coat tighter. It wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough even inside the cabin. Out here, it felt like he was wearing tissue paper. Snow stung his cheeks, biting until the skin turned numb and stiff. Frost crept across his eyelashes. The cold didn't just sit on a man. It climbed inside him, finding the soft places, the doubts, the wounds. Shadow leaned into him more firmly. "Yeah," Logan murmured. "I know. We can't stay here." Behind them, the cabin door stayed shut. No second thoughts, no apology, no mercy. The last porch light flickered once, then steadied, throwing a long stretch of yellow across the snow. A boundary line, a warning. Logan stepped beyond it. He adjusted his pack, a small one with little inside besides an old blanket, a folding knife, and a dented metal cup. Everything else had been left behind, locked inside the cabin Earl now guarded like a man protecting his pride. Logan didn't bother trying the door again. He wasn't going to beg. He'd done enough of that in life. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked down the narrow dirt path leading away from the ranch. Shadow stayed pressed to his side, head low, tail down but alert. The dog's instincts had always been sharper than any alarm system. Tonight, they screamed danger in every direction. The cold, the wind, the darkness swallowing the horizon. "Just need to reach town," Logan told him. "Someone will help." But even as he said it, the memory of shuttered windows and whispered gossip in Red Valley returned to him. Folks liked having a veteran nearby when a fence needed fixing, when a storm knocked out power, when bears wandered too close. But they didn't want one living next door. Not one who woke up sweating and shaking some nights. Not one who stared too long at certain sounds. Snow thickened, turning the air into a white wall. Logan kept moving, each breath burning now, more ice than oxygen. His thoughts drifted, unwanted, undirected, toward long nights in desert outposts, the silence before shelling, the feeling of not knowing whether morning would come. His pulse spiked, vision tightening. Shadow barked once, sharp and urgent, nudging him hard in the thigh. Logan blinked. Reality snapped back into place. "Thanks," he whispered, gripping the dog's scruff for a second. They trudged another 100 yards before Logan finally stopped. Not because he wanted to, because he couldn't feel his fingertips anymore, because his knees shook with each step as if they might buckle, because Shadow's breathing had turned shallow and uneven. This cold wasn't just inconvenient, it was lethal. Off in the distance, the ranch had disappeared entirely into the storm. No forgiving call from Earl would come. No neighbor would dare walk out in this weather, even if they cared, and no one cared enough to try. Logan looked down into Shadow's dark eyes. Snowflakes clung to the dog's muzzle, and the fur around his ears had stiffened into crystals. Shadow leaned forward, resting his forehead against Logan's knee, a quiet plea and a reminder. They had survived worse. They could survive this, but not here. And not like this. Logan swallowed the rising panic. He needed shelter, any shelter, and he needed it now. He turned into the wind, tightening his grip on Shadow's collar as they pushed forward together, step by punishing step, into a night that seemed determined to erase them from the earth. Behind them, Earl Dempsey's cabin glowed warm and bright. Ahead of them stretched only darkness and cold, and the terrifying, undeniable truth. They were alone. More alone than Logan had been since the day the army sent him home with a folded flag and a future he wasn't sure he deserved. But Shadow stayed with him. Shadow always stayed. And as the storm swallowed the last light behind them, Logan Brooks whispered the first promise of their long, brutal night. "We keep moving. We survive, no matter what." Then he and Shadow disappeared into the blizzard. The world beyond that line of drifting snow was nothing but white and wind, an endless, twisting maze of cold that bit deeper with every step. Logan's boots sank into drifts up to his shins, slowing him to a crawl. Shadow stayed at his heel, head down, leaning into the storm like a soldier pushing through enemy fire. Each gust shoved them sideways. Each breath stung Logan's lungs like needles. Red Valley lay somewhere ahead. But in this storm, distance felt meaningless. The wind erased everything. The sky, the horizon, the past, the path home. Logan walked by memory alone, following the faint outline of the fence posts that lined Earl's property. If he could reach the far road, he could follow it into town. If he could reach town, maybe someone would open their door. Maybe. Shadow barked once, the sound sharp and swallowed instantly by the wind. Logan knelt and steadied the dog, checking his ears, checking his breath. "I know, buddy. Just hold on." They trudged another half-mile before the first faint glow of Red Valley appeared. Soft, blurred halos of porch lights shimmering through the snow like lanterns on a distant shore. Logan felt something loosen in his chest. They had made it. Shelter wasn't far now. The first house belonged to the McCrearys, a family he had helped last spring when their pipes burst. Logan knocked hard enough his knuckles burned. "Mrs. McCreary? It's Logan. We just need a little warmth." Shadows moved behind the curtains. Then, nothing. The lights stayed on, but the door stayed closed. Logan waited, breath fogging into thick clouds. He knocked again, softer. "It's freezing out here. Shadows shaking. Please." The curtain shifted. Someone peeked out, then snapped it shut like he was a threat. The porch light clicked off. Logan swallowed hard. "Okay," he murmured. "Next place." Shadow pressed close, sensing the hurt even if he didn't understand the reasons behind it. Together, they moved on. At the old Henderson barn, Logan had repaired the tractor engine just 2 months ago. He remembered Mr. Henderson shaking his hand, telling him he was a blessing around here. But tonight, when Logan knocked on his door, Henderson cracked it open just an inch. "What do you want?" he barked. "Just a place to warm up, just for an hour." "You know what folks say about you, Brooks," Henderson muttered. "You're unstable. I got grandkids sleeping inside. Can't risk it." Logan felt the words hit harder than the wind. "I've never hurt anyone. Not taking chances. Move along." The door shut so fast the wind barely had time to slip inside. Shadow growled low, sensing Logan's rising tension. Logan knelt down, gripping his fur. "It's okay. He's scared. That's all." But fear or not, the rejection burned. They tried the church next. Reverend Hale was a man who liked to preach about kindness and shelter. Logan pounded on the side door until the hinges rattled. After a long moment, the pastor's voice floated out, muffled through the wood. "We're full for the night." "You didn't even open the door," Logan said, snow gathering in the folds of his collar. "Please, Reverend, just let Shadow warm up." A pause, then, "I'm sorry. You'll need to find somewhere else." Logan stood there for several seconds, staring at the carved wooden cross above the entrance. Snow clung to its edges like a quiet accusation. Shadow nosed his hand. Logan blinked slowly, grounding himself in the dog's steady presence. "Let's just keep walking." They crossed the town square next, their footprints swallowed instantly by fresh snowfall. Logan's vision blurred at the edges, the cold creeping deeper, slowing his thoughts. Each step grew heavier than the last. A distant memory flickered. Nights on patrol, sand and heat and fatigue blurring into one endless march. But out there, he had a squad. He had brothers. Now he had Shadow. And Shadow had him. They reached the Sinclair gas station, where Logan had changed the owner's tire during summer. The windows were lit. Somebody was inside. Logan pulled the door, but it was locked. He knocked, gently at first, then harder. The attendant, Tommy, a boy barely 20, looked up from behind the counter. When he saw Logan, his eyes widened. He shook his head firmly. Logan tried again. "Tommy, come on, it's me!" Tommy mouthed something through the glass. Logan leaned closer. "Can't let you in." "Why?" "I helped your family." Tommy shook his head again, pointing toward a sign taped to the front register. "No loitering. No exceptions." Logan stepped back, breath trembling. Shadow whined softly. "Okay," Logan whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. "Okay." They pushed onward, slipping through the narrow path between buildings as the storm intensified. The cold no longer felt like a force outside his body. It felt like it had seeped into his bones. His fingers had gone stiff, his ears numb, his thoughts fogged in and out, like trying to tune a broken radio. They reached the little rental cabin at the far edge of town, the place Logan sometimes stayed when he was working odd jobs. He tried the door out of instinct, But of course it was locked. Earl had rented it out to another worker last week. Logan stared at the peeling paint, memories flooding in. A warm stove, a soft mat where Shadow liked to sleep, a place they used to call theirs. Shadow nudged his leg, urging him forward. Logan forced his legs to move. He didn't know how long they had been wandering when the blizzard finally swallowed the last bit of light. It could have been minutes. It could have been hours. Time didn't exist in storms like this. Only the next step. And the next. Finally, Logan stopped beneath a street lamp flickering in the wind. Snow spiraled around it like ghostly ribbons. His breath hitched. His chest tightened. Not from panic this time, but from the crushing realization that there truly was nowhere left. No warm cabin, no friendly neighbor, no second chances. Shadow leaned into him harder, shivering uncontrollably now. Logan wrapped his arms around the dog, pulling him close. "I'm sorry," he whispered into Shadow's fur. "You deserve better than this." A gust hit them so hard Logan staggered. He looked past the swirling snow toward the dark silhouette of the rail yard at the edge of town. Rusted metal shapes stood in rows like forgotten monuments. A thought sparked. Desperate. Wild. But real. "Come on," he said, gripping Shadow's collar one more time. "Maybe the rail yard has something. Anything." And with the storm pressing in from every side, Logan Brooks led Shadow into the frozen dark, chasing the faintest chance of survival. The rail yard rose out of the blizzard like the skeleton of a long-dead beast. Massive steel shapes half buried in snow, tracks twisting under drifts, boxcars standing silent and frostbitten beneath the night sky. The wind cut through the open yard with a higher, sharper whistle, bouncing off iron walls and echoing like a warning. Shadow hesitated at the edge, ears pinned back. Logan rested a hand on his neck. "I know, buddy. It's cold as death in here, but at least something's standing." Snow crunched under their boots as they crossed into the yard. Logan scanned through the swirling white, searching for anything with a roof. Most boxcars were sealed, chained, or collapsed under years of disuse. A few newer ones sat further down the line, but they'd be locked tight. They needed something forgotten, something no one cared enough to maintain, just like them. Shadow pulled ahead suddenly, nose low to the ground. Logan followed, his breath fogging hard. The dog tugged him past the main row of cars, toward a crooked siding track he hadn't noticed at first. The storm had nearly swallowed it. But there, through the blur of snow, stood a single, rust-colored boxcar tilted slightly to one side, its wheels half-fused into ice and overgrown weeds. A relic. The paint had peeled to nothing but flakes of red and orange. The metal siding bore deep scars of weather and time. The car looked abandoned decades ago, left behind like a piece of broken machinery no one bothered hauling away. Shadow barked once, quick and insistent. "You find something?" Logan followed the dog to the railcar door. A heavy, frozen slab of metal jammed half an inch open. Ice had sealed the edges. Logan pressed his palm to it, feeling the cold radiate through his glove like it was burning instead of freezing. He tried to slide it. Nothing. He braced both hands against it and pushed until his shoulders screamed. The door groaned, the sound swallowed by the storm. He planted his feet, leaned in harder, using every ounce of strength left in his exhausted frame. The door lurched. Half an inch. Another inch. Ice cracked away, falling in sharp pieces to the ground. Wind rushed through the widening gap, carrying the metal smell of old rails with it. "Come on," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Move!" Shadow shoved his body beside Logan, bracing him instinctively as Logan threw his weight into the door again. The railcar shrieked, a long, tortured scrape of iron on iron, and then it slid open just enough for a man and a dog to slip inside. Logan stumbled into the darkness. The wind slammed the door halfway shut behind them, leaving a narrow gap that let in a sliver of swirling snow but blocked the worst of the storm. Logan blinked, letting his eyes adjust. The air inside was icy, but still, quiet. The kind of quiet he hadn't heard since before everything changed. Shadow sniffed along the floor, his footsteps echoing lightly in the hollow space. Logan pulled out his lighter, one of the few things he always kept in his coat. He flicked it once, and a small flame bloomed, sending faint gold light across the railcar. The interior was bigger than he expected. 30 feet long, 8 feet wide, wood planks worn but intact. There were gaps in the wallboards, thin slivers where the wind hissed through, but the roof appeared solid. No snow piled inside. No water dripped from above. The place smelled like old timber and rust and something else, something human. Shadow padded toward the far corner and stopped, ears forward. What is it? Logan lifted the flame higher. A dented tin box sat wedged between two boards. Logan approached slowly, crouched, and pried it loose. The hinges were stiff, but the lid opened with a soft pop. Inside were two items wrapped in aged cloth, a silver coin dulled with time, and a folded piece of paper yellowed to the color of old bone. Shadow sat beside him, watching. Logan unfolded the note carefully, almost reverently. The handwriting was shaky but strong enough to read, "If you found this place, you're stronger than you think. Winter almost killed me out there. This boxcar saved my life in 1967. Let it save yours too." Logan stared at the words, a heavy breath slipping out of him. In the silence, the storm battered the metal walls like a beast desperate to break in. But the message in his hand felt like someone reaching through time, someone who had been exactly where he now knelt. He swallowed hard. "Someone else made it," he whispered to Shadow. "Someone survived in here." Shadow leaned his warm body against Logan's side as if agreeing. For the first time since Earl had slammed that door, something inside Logan shifted. Something small but powerful, like the spark under kindling. Hope. He folded the note and set it gently back inside the tin. Then he took off his gloves, rubbing his aching hands together before tucking Shadow's head under his arm to share whatever warmth he had left. "This'll do," he murmured. "It has to." Logan scanned the railcar again. Its weathered walls, its empty floor, the faint trails of starlight leaking through the cracks. It wasn't home. It wasn't safe. But it was shelter. And shelter could be turned into survival. The wind roared outside, shaking the boxcar on its old wheels. Snow cracked against the siding like thrown gravel. But inside, Logan sat with Shadow curled against him, lighter flame dancing in the darkness, a man and his dog claiming a forgotten space as their last refuge. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we start building this place up. You and me." Shadow thumped his tail once, slow and soft. Logan let the lighter flame die, plunging them into the dark. But for the first time that night, the dark didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a beginning. The storm raged through the night, pounding against the railcar with gusts that made the metal shell shudder. Logan barely slept. Sleep came in brief moments, seconds maybe, cut short by the cold that crawled into his bones or the sudden slam of wind against steel. Shadow lay pressed against his chest beneath the old blanket, trembling every so often, but still keeping Logan grounded with the soft weight of his body. When morning came, it came slowly, pale gray light creeping in through the hairline cracks between the boards. Logan opened his eyes to see his own breath drifting upward like smoke. Shadow lifted his head and nudged Logan under the chin. "Yeah, boy," Logan whispered, stiff and aching. "We lived through one night. Now we make it through the next." He pushed himself upright and stretched his numb fingers until they tingled painfully. The railcar interior looked even rougher in daylight. Walls worn thin in spots, boards bowed, metal flecked with rust. Yet nothing dripped, nothing collapsed. It was a structure, a shell, a second chance. A second. Logan stood and tested the floor. The wood didn't give. It held. Good. First step, he murmured. Windproofing. He moved to the largest gaps in the siding and pressed his hand flat against them. Freezing gusts sliced through, biting at his palm. If they were going to survive more than a couple of nights here, he needed insulation. Something, anything, to plug those openings. Shadow barked once, breaking Logan's focus. The dog was pawing at the corner where they'd found the tin box. He scratched at something on the floorboards, a small bundle that must have been hidden by darkness earlier. Logan crouched beside him and lifted the object. It was an old burlap sack, brittle at the edges, but still intact enough to hold shape. "Well," Logan said softly, ruffling Shadow's ears, "guess you're already earning your keep." He tore the sack into strips and began stuffing them into the widest cracks, pushing them deep with a piece of wood he found on the floor. His fingers stung, but the work warmed him. Slowly, the railcar changed. The wind's sharp whistle softened. The drafts became thinner, smaller, manageable. Shadow watched for a while, then wandered to the door, nudging it with his nose and whining. "You want out?" Logan asked. Shadow pawed the metal. Logan pulled the door open a few inches, letting in a burst of frigid air. Shadow leapt into the snow, sniffing the ground, searching with a soldier's instinct. Logan followed, blinking against the brightness. Outside, the storm had blown past, leaving the world carved in white drifts and quiet. The sky glowed pale blue, the kind of cold that felt clean but dangerous if you stayed still too long. Shadow trotted ahead, nose low to the frozen earth. Logan quickly understood what he was doing, tracking, searching for anything useful. Logan followed behind as Shadow weaved between old freight cars and piles of scrap. Within minutes, the dog stopped and barked. Logan hurried to him, finding Shadow standing beside a collapsed wooden pallet, half buried in snow. Logan knelt and tugged the pallet free. It was worn, splintered, but still solid enough to elevate them off the freezing floor. "Good boy," Logan murmured. "Real good." Nearby, Shadow found more. Scraps of rope tangled in weeds, a warped metal panel from an old switching station, and several broken boards dry enough to burn. Logan piled them into his arms again and again, carrying each bundle back to the railcar, determined to use every piece. By midday, the shelter had transformed. Logan propped the metal panel beneath a corner where the wind pushed hardest, reinforcing the wall. He stacked wood scraps into a makeshift barrier along the opposite side. He tied rope across two beams to hang their blanket like a curtain, trapping their body heat into a smaller space. And then came the hardest part. The fire. The railcar was all wood. One mistake could turn it into a coffin. Logan knew that too well. He'd seen barracks burn in the desert, watched fire move faster than men could run. But cold killed just as quickly. He selected a shallow spot near the center of the car, away from every wall, and placed the metal panel beneath it. Then, using board fragments and driftwood Shadow had found, he built the smallest fire pit he could manage. A nest of shavings, a layer of splinters, a handful of twigs. Shadow sat perfectly still, as if he understood the stakes. Logan pulled a single match from his pocket. "Just one," he whispered. "Don't waste it." He struck it. Flame burst, sharp and bright. Logan held it to the tinder, breath held tight in his chest. The flame flickered, struggled, then caught. Smoke curled upward, drifting toward the roof. Logan watched its path, making sure it found the cracks he'd intentionally left unsealed. The smoke escaped. The fire grew to a small, controlled glow. Warmth, real warmth, spread around the tin walls. Shadow eased closer, laying his head on Logan's knee. Logan rested a hand between the dog's ears, feeling the tension in both their bodies soften just enough to breathe again. The rest of the day passed in steady work. Logan arranged the pallet into a raised sleeping platform. He layered it with the blanket and old cloth he tore from the pallet bindings. He stacked the remaining wood neatly, rationing every scrap. He cleaned the railcar floor with a piece of cloth, sweeping aside dust and forgotten fragments from some long-ago freight. With each task, the place changed, not just physically, but in spirit. It became less of a tomb and more of a refuge, a place shaped by human hands, by intention, by survival. As evening crept in again, Logan sat on the pallet beside Shadow, the fire glowing low and steady in its metal cradle. Outside, the sky had shifted from blue to rose to a deep, frozen violet. Snow glimmered beneath the fading light like crushed glass. He reached for the tin box again and took out the silver coin. It was worn smooth on one side as if rubbed for luck. He held it between his fingers. "Someone made it," he whispered. "Someone sat right where we are and lived long enough to leave a message." Shadow nudged his elbow gently. "Yeah," Logan murmured. "Maybe we can too." The dog curled against him. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, Logan felt the faintest sense of belonging, not to the world outside, but to this moment, this shelter, this chance. He looked around the railcar, now warmer, safer, changed by their hands. This wasn't the end. It was the place where survival began. By the next morning, the railcar felt almost like a living thing, quiet, breathing with them, holding the fragile warmth Logan and Shadow had carved into it. The fire had burned low, but steady through the night, and when Logan pushed himself upright, he could see his breath, but no longer feel the ache of ice in his bones. That alone felt like a miracle. Shadow stretched beside him, paws thumping lightly on the wooden pallet. His ears twitched at every sound, the settling groan of metal, the soft hiss of wind outside, the creak of Logan's joints, as if memorizing the new territory they had claimed. Logan rubbed his head. "Good work yesterday, partner." Shadow nudged his hand, then padded toward the door, sniffing intently. "Yeah," Logan said. "We should check the outside. Make sure nothing collapsed in the storm." Logan slid the door open slowly, careful not to disturb the precarious seal they'd forced into place. A blast of cold pushed in, stinging his face. Snow had piled up overnight, paling the entire yard into a canvas of white. The sun hung weak and low, turning frost crystals into shimmering glass. It looked peaceful, deceptively peaceful. Shadow bounded into the snow, nose buried deep as he searched for new trails. Logan stepped out after him, brushing frost from his beard, scanning the horizon for signs of more storms. Instead, he saw movement. A man crossing the yard, coat buttoned high, hat pulled low, footsteps brisk and deliberate. Not a drifter, not someone searching for scraps, someone who belonged there. Logan's heartbeat sped up. Shadow stiffened, standing half protectively, half curious, tail low. The man approached with a notebook tucked under one arm, his boots crunching rhythmically through the snow. When he reached speaking distance, he stopped and eyed the railcar behind Logan. "You shouldn't be in there," he said flatly. Logan straightened. "We didn't damage anything, just needed shelter." "That's not the point." The man pulled a badge from his coat pocket. "Caleb Morgan, property inspector for Red Valley Rail and Freight." Shadow growled, deep in his chest. Caleb kept his distance but didn't flinch. "Remove the dog." "He's trained," Logan said. "He won't touch you unless I give the order." Caleb eyed Shadow like he doubted that very much. "Whether he's trained or not, you two are trespassing." Logan's jaw tightened. The car was abandoned, frozen shut. No one's used it in decades. Still not your property. Caleb opened his notebook, flipping to a page already marked. I've had 2 calls this morning. Town residents reporting someone wandering the rail yard during the storm. Imagine my surprise when I find a fire burning inside an old freight car. Logan felt heat rise in his cheeks. Not anger, embarrassment, shame. A familiar cocktail. We weren't looking for trouble, Logan said. Just trying to stay alive. Caleb clicked his pen. Doesn't change the law. Shadow stepped closer to Logan's leg, sensing his tension. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Control the animal. Logan laid a hand on Shadow's neck. Slowly, the dog settled, though his muscles remained tight. Caleb continued. You have 48 hours to vacate this property. Logan blinked. What? You heard me. The company doesn't permit unauthorized occupancy of rail assets, abandoned or not. It's 20 below out here. Not my concern. Logan stared at him. There's nowhere else to go. Caleb shrugged, unmoved. That's not my problem either. Shadow growled again, louder this time. Caleb stepped back, gripping his notebook as if it were a shield. And, Caleb added sharply, if you insist on staying, there is a temporary use fee. Logan's stomach dropped. A what? $12 a week. Logan actually laughed, a short, hollow sound he didn't mean to make. I don't even have $12 to my name. Then you'll have to leave. 48 hours. Caleb snapped the notebook shut. I'll return to verify. He turned away without waiting for Logan to respond. Logan watched him walk back across the frozen yard, the inspector's footsteps crisp and confident, untouched by the cold they had barely survived. His breath steamed in front of him, each exhale another reminder that hope could still be taken away as quickly as it appeared. Shadow whined softly, brushing against his leg. I know, Logan said quietly, kneeling to grip the dog by his shoulders. We just got this place. We were just starting to breathe again. The wind swept snow across the inspector's disappearing tracks, burying them almost instantly, like the world itself was trying to erase the encounter. Logan looked back at the railcar, the patched cracks, the raised pallet, the fragile fire ring. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was the only place they had left. The only thing keeping Shadow warm. The only thing keeping Logan from being swallowed alive by a storm outside and a storm inside. $12, he murmured bitterly. Where am I supposed to get $12? Shadow pressed his head into Logan's chest, and Logan wrapped his arms around him, burying his face into the dog's fur. It wasn't just the cold tightening his lungs now. It was fear. Real, bone-deep fear that this fragile haven could be ripped away. That the storm outside had only been the first battle, and the next enemy wouldn't be the weather, but the world of rules and judgments he had been trying to outrun since the day he came home from war. After a long moment, Logan stood. His legs were shaky, but his resolve had hardened. We'll figure something out, he whispered. We always do. Shadow wagged his tail once, as if agreeing. Logan looked back toward Red Valley. 48 hours. Time enough to try. Time enough to fail. But he wasn't quitting. Not with Shadow beside him. Not with a shred of warmth left in the railcar. If he had to fight for this shelter, then he would. Because the railcar wasn't just metal and wood. It was hope. And hope was the hardest thing for a man like Logan Brooks to find. And the last thing he was willing to surrender. Logan stood outside the railcar long after the inspector's footsteps vanished into the wind. The cold gnawed at his skin, trying to find a way in, but he barely felt it. His mind churned with one relentless question. How do I make $12 in 48 hours? Shadow nudged his leg, sensing the storm inside him even more clearly than the one that had battered them days before. Logan rested a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself. "We're not losing this place," he said, voice deep and steady. "Not after everything." The dog answered with a quiet whine, pressing closer. Logan pulled the railcar door shut behind them and sat on the pallet, staring at the flicker of the tiny fire they'd built. His hands were cracked from cold, his legs stiff, but his thoughts kept racing. In another life, before the uniform, before the deployments, before the long road home, $12 would have been nothing. Now it felt like a mountain made of ice. He'd worked odd jobs around Red Valley for years, repairing fences, splitting wood, mucking out barns. But that was before people knew about the PTSD, before the flashbacks, before they started whispering words that stung more than winter wind. Unstable, broken, dangerous. He rubbed the scar above his eyebrow, a reminder of a night overseas when mortar fire threw him harder than any man could, a reminder of the day things changed. Shadow crawled onto his lap, despite being far too big for it. Logan let out a soft, surprised breath. "All right, big guy. Guess we keep moving." By mid-morning, Logan and Shadow headed into town. The sky stretched pale and unforgiving above them, the kind of winter sky that made everything feel brittle. Smoke curled from chimneys across Red Valley, each column rising from homes warm enough to forget the suffering outside. Logan tried not to look at them too long. His boots left wavering tracks behind him, Shadow trailing faithfully at his side. Logan's first stop was the lumberyard. The owner, Clint Harrow, was stacking planks when Logan approached. "Clint," Logan began, hands shoved into his pockets. "You need help today? Anything at all?" Clint paused, rolling his jaw. "Heard you were wandering the rail yard last night. That true?" "Had no choice," Logan replied. "Storm hit hard." Clint's eyes flicked to Shadow. "Dog's looking rough." "He's fine," Logan said quickly. Clint shook his head. "Don't need extra hands right now. Winter's slow." "But I can work cheap," Logan pressed. "Just need a few dollars." Clint tightened his lips. "Not today." Logan thanked him anyway and moved on. Shadow trotted quietly, glancing back at Logan often, head low. Next stop was the Miller farm. Logan had patched gates there just last month. Mrs. Miller opened the door only halfway, her shawl tight around her shoulders. "Mrs. Miller," Logan said, "I'm looking for work. Anything you need done. Wood stacking, fence repair, you name it." Behind her, Logan heard whispers. Someone asking who was at the door. Someone else saying, "Don't let him in." Mrs. Miller's eyes flickered with sympathy, but fear overshadowed it. "I'm sorry, Logan. Not today." He nodded, backing away slowly. As they walked down the road, Logan felt the old ache behind his ribs, a hollow space war left behind. He'd learned to live with it, but days like this made it echo. "That's 2 down," he muttered. "Let's keep trying." Shadow pressed his shoulder against Logan's leg as they trudged toward the 3rd place. The Weiler's barn sat crooked at the far end of town, its door swinging open in the wind. Logan found Mr. Weiler inside, struggling to lift a hammer with swollen hands. "Arthritis?" Logan asked gently. "Gets worse every winter," the old man said with a grimace. "I can help. Just let me." Weiler eyed him a long moment, then relented. "Hammer's on the stump." Logan got to work without another word. He replaced rotten boards, secured loose nails, patched gaps where wind whistled through. Shadow lay watchfully near the open door, ears flicking at passing crows. For the first time since morning, Logan felt useful again, like a man who could still offer something, still fix something. His muscles remembered the rhythm. His hands remembered their purpose. When he finished, Weiler nodded. "Good work." Logan waited a moment before asking, "Do you have anything you could pay? Even a little?" The old man hesitated. Logan braced himself for disappointment. Weiler sighed and opened a drawer in the tool shed, pulling out a small leather pouch. He pressed it into Logan's hand. 62 cents, he said. It's all I got. Logan swallowed hard. Thank you. Wish I could give more, Weiler added. You deserve more than folks say. Shadow barked once, tail wagging slightly. Weiler smiled. And you take care of that dog. He's got your heart pinned to him. Logan walked away, lighter somehow, clutching the small pouch. Not enough, but something. A beginning. They continued through town. Logan chopped wood behind the diner. He shoveled 2 driveways. He hauled supplies for a mechanic who nodded curtly and handed over a single dollar bill. Logan tucked each precious coin and crumpled note into his pocket. His breath came ragged, more from exhaustion than cold. Shadow never left his side. When Logan's breath quickened too sharply, PTSD creeping in from the edges, Shadow nudged him, grounding him before the flashback could take hold. When Logan faltered on icy ground, Shadow braced under him, steady and sure. By sundown, Logan counted his earnings, $2.74. He exhaled a shaky breath. We're still short. Shadow's ears drooped. Logan crouched and wrapped both arms around the dog, burying his face into Shadow's fur. I'm not giving up. Not on this place, not on you. The railcar stood dark on the horizon, lonely but waiting, its silhouette strong against the dusk. It was theirs, for now. But tomorrow, the inspector would return, and Logan Brooks still needed $9.26 to keep the only home he had left. The wind swept over them as if urging them forward again. Tomorrow, Logan whispered. We fight again tomorrow. Shadow nudged his nose against Logan's palm in silent agreement. They turned back toward the railcar, their haven hanging by a thread, and disappeared into the growing night. By the time Logan pushed the heavy sliding door shut behind them, darkness had already swallowed the rail yard. The fire pit still held a faint glow, enough to thaw Logan's frozen fingers as he worked to build it back up. Shadow collapsed onto the pallet, sides rising and falling with exhausted breaths. Logan watched him, brow tightening. You're running harder than you should, he murmured. We'll rest tomorrow. But tomorrow had other plans. The wind began to pick up again just after dawn, sharp, irregular gusts that rattled the loose boards of the railcar. Logan woke instantly, instincts firing the same way they had in desert outposts years ago when sudden winds carried danger. His pulse jumped. Shadow's ears flicked, nose twitching as he lifted his head to listen. Logan eased up on one elbow. That's not normal wind. He crawled to the narrow gap by the door and peered outside. Snow blew sideways, not gently, but violently, slicing through the air in white streaks. The sky above looked bruised, blue fading into purple, then sinking into a strange, sickly yellow near the horizon. A storm was coming, a real one. Shadow moved beside him, letting out a low whine. I know, Logan whispered. We're not ready for this. He spent the next hour reinforcing everything inside the railcar. He stuffed more burlap into the cracks, secured the pallet platform, tied down the blankets so they wouldn't flap loose in the wind. He fed the fire until the stones glowed, rerouted smoke through the vent he'd carved above the south wall. All the while the wind grew louder, howling through the yard like a wounded animal. Shadow paced near the door, restless. Logan tried to calm him. Easy, Shadow. Stay close. Then afternoon fell like a hammer. The storm hit with a force that shook the entire railcar on its rusted wheels. Snow slammed against the metal siding in bursts so heavy it sounded like gravel. The temperature plummeted. Logan could feel it instantly. The air inside turning sharp, biting. Shadow backed up, tail tucked, eyes wide. Logan crouched beside him. We're okay. We're inside. We've got fire. But even as he said it, a thin draft sliced through a gap he had thought sealed. Then another. The railcar moaned as wind pressed against it from every direction. This storm was nothing like the last. This one meant to break things. Night fell early. Shadows thickened in the corners. Logan fed the fire again, but the flames leaned sideways, bending under the drafts as if trying to escape. He checked Shadow, fur bristling, breath unsteady. "You stay here," Logan said. "I'm going to check the roof seams." But before he could stand fully, a sudden slam echoed against the railcar, shaking the entire structure. Logan froze. Shadow lunged forward, barking sharply. Then another slam, harder, like something massive had struck the far wall. The sound triggered something in Logan instantly. His vision tightened, his heartbeat pounded in his ears. For a split second, he wasn't in Montana. He wasn't in the cold. He was back overseas, sand in his teeth, alarms blaring. Shadow barked again, sharp and urgent, snapping Logan back into the present. Logan grabbed the dog's collar, grounding himself. "I'm here! I'm here!" He took a breath. Another. The panic began to subside. But the storm didn't. It intensified. The railcar rocked on its wheels, the metal groaning with every gust. Snow hammered the roof in thick waves. Logan felt the floor vibrate beneath them, and Shadow pressed his body against him, trembling not from fear alone but from something deeper. Instinct. Warning. The temperature dropped so low Logan could see the fire struggling to keep up. Frost crawled along the inside of the walls like white vines. Logan wrapped another blanket around Shadow, rubbing warmth into the dog's sides. "We're okay," he whispered. "We're okay." But Shadow coughed, soft at first, a tiny hitch in his breath. Logan frowned. "Shadow, you good?" Another cough, harder. Logan pressed a hand to the dog's chest. Heat radiated through the fur. Too much heat. Panic shot through him. No, buddy, not now." Shadow's breaths grew lighter, faster. His tail curled inward. He tried to stand but wobbled, legs shaking before he managed to settle back down again. Logan's throat tightened. "It's the cold. The work. Yesterday was too much for you." Shadow let out a low groan and rested his head on Logan's knee. The storm howled louder, drowning out nearly every sound except the soft, ragged breaths of the one friend Logan couldn't lose. Logan looked around helplessly, at the thin blankets, the small fire, the fragile walls that bent under the assault of winter's fury. They were trapped, and Shadow was getting worse. He pulled the dog into his arms, holding him close, burying his face into Shadow's fur. "Stay with me," he whispered, voice trembling. "Just stay." The storm roared in reply, slamming into the railcar with enough force to rattle Logan's teeth. Snow and ice seeped through the cracks he hadn't sealed well enough. The air grew sharper, colder, meaner. Shadow coughed again, the sound weak and wet. Logan blinked hard, fighting the rising terror. He had faced firefights, explosions, nights with no horizon and no promises. He had survived all of it. But this helplessness, this fear of losing the only steady thing left in his life, this hit deeper. He stood, Shadow cradled in his arms, and sat on the pallet, curling around the dog to share his body heat. "We're gonna make it," he whispered into Shadow's ear. "I won't let this storm take you." The wind screamed, drowning out everything but the desperate pounding of Logan's heart. Outside, the world turned white. Inside, a fire flickered against the cold. And in Logan's arms, Shadow trembled, caught between the warmth of his partner and the chill trying to claim them both. By midnight, the storm had become something out of another world. Less weather, more force of nature. Snow blasted sideways, screaming across the yard, burying everything in white. The railcar lurched on its frozen wheels with every violent gust, the old metal groaning like it was begging for mercy. Logan held Shadow close, feeling the dog's labored breaths grow shallower. Heat radiated off Shadow in waves. A dangerous heat, the kind that came only with fever. Logan pressed his forehead to Shadow's and whispered, "Stay with me, buddy. I'm right here." Shadow tried to lift his head in response, but couldn't. He gave only the faintest thump of his tail before settling back into Logan's arms. Outside, the wind shrieked so loudly the walls vibrated. Every few minutes, something slammed against the railcar. Branches, shards of ice, debris. Logan couldn't tell. Each hit sent a jolt through his spine. He stood and checked the fire again. The flames flickered desperately, leaning sideways as drafts forced their way through the cracks. Smoke wavered, drifting toward the roof before escaping through the makeshift vent. But the cold sucked heat from the air faster than the fire could produce it. Logan dragged more wood toward the pit, feeding the flames carefully. "Hold on," he muttered. "Gotta keep this going." But his breath, too, was starting to shake. His fingers were stiff, trembling, not from fear, but from the creeping cold that managed to invade even their shelter. A sudden boom rocked the railcar so violently that Logan stumbled into the wall, bracing himself. Shadow jolted awake, coughing painfully. Logan steadied him and whispered, "Easy, easy." The storm was changing, deepening. Logan could feel it in the pressure behind his eyes, in the way the world outside seemed to pulse with something heavy and relentless. Then the temperature dropped again. A sudden, sharp cold swept over Logan's face like someone had opened a freezer door. Frost danced along the metal walls, spiderwebbing outward in thin, white veins. In minutes, the warmth they'd built up was nearly gone. Logan cursed under his breath. "We're not going to make it like this." Shadow wheezed in response, curling toward him. Logan gathered every scrap of fabric they had: pallet cloth, torn burlap, the blanket he'd packed from Earl's ranch, and wrapped them around the dog. He knelt, pulling Shadow into his lap, using his own body as insulation. "I've got you," he murmured, rocking slightly. "I've got you." But the storm only grew worse. A massive gust slammed into the railcar so violently that one of the interior beams trembled, dust falling from above. Shadow barked weakly, startled. Logan moved toward the wall and pressed his hand against it. The metal was freezing. It burned to the touch. He looked toward the small cracks he had stuffed with burlap days earlier. Some had frozen solid. Others had loosened again, letting small flurries of snow drift into the shelter. He couldn't fix them, not with the temperature dropping this fast. Shadow coughed again, the sound tearing through Logan like a blade. He felt helpless, truly helpless. He'd faced nights overseas with nothing but grit and instinct. He'd survived firefights, explosions, and the kind of uncertainty that ate at a soldier's soul. But this was a different kind of enemy. This was nature, indifferent, ruthless. The only thing he could do was hold on. Hold on for Shadow, hold on for himself, hold on for morning, if morning would come. A sudden roar of wind hit the railcar, and the entire structure leaned hard to one side before slowly creaking back into place. Logan braced Shadow protectively, pressing the dog beneath his arms. "Stay down. Stay close." His heart hammered in his chest, not with the frantic rhythm of panic, but with the controlled, practiced beat of a soldier under fire. Years of training rose to the surface, the same instincts that had kept him alive overseas. He scanned the space, the beams, the vents, the pallet platform. He checked the fire pit again, adjusting the stones to keep it burning safely. He breathed slowly, deliberately, pushing back the edges of rising flashback. Stay present. Stay aware. Shadow was slipping in and out of consciousness. His breaths came in a soft rattle. Logan rubbed a hand along his ribs, whispering gently, "Don't you dare leave me, Shadow. You hear me? You stay. You fight." The storm grew so loud Logan could no longer hear the crackle of the fire. The entire rail yard disappeared behind a curtain of white fury. Even the faint light leaking through the cracks dimmed, swallowed by the blizzard outside. Hours stretched into something shapeless. Logan lost track of time. He only knew the cold was winning. His legs felt numb. His fingertips burned. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth hurt. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Shadow needed him. At some point, maybe minutes, maybe hours, a terrifying quiet settled over the railcar. The kind of quiet that didn't belong in a storm. Logan held his breath, listening. No wind, no slamming ice, no shaking walls. Only silence. Shadow shifted weakly in his arms, letting out a faint whimper. Logan stroked his head. "It's okay, bud. It's just the eye of the storm. We're not done yet." And he was right. A sound rose slowly from the distance, low at first, like a giant inhaling, and then the wind returned with a force that rattled Logan's bones. The storm was only halfway through. Shadow shivered violently. Logan wrapped himself tighter around him, trying desperately to share heat. The world outside roared like it had split open. Logan felt something in him crack under the weight of it. The exhaustion, the fear, the sense of being hunted by elements that did not care who they destroyed. He buried his face in Shadow's fur and whispered into the dog's ear, voice thick. "We survived this. Both of us. Do you hear me? Both." Shadow let out a faint, trembling sigh. Logan held him closer as the blizzard slammed into the railcar again, roaring its promise of death. Inside that battered metal shell, man and dog clung to each other. The only warmth, the only heartbeat, the only hope, fighting hour by hour through a storm that seemed determined to erase them from the world. And still, the night wasn't over. When dawn finally arrived, it came without light. The blizzard had not stopped. It had simply thickened into a white, swirling wall that erased the sky, the horizon, the very concept of distance. The railcar shook less now, not because the storm had weakened, but because it had buried them so deeply in snow that only the roof and upper siding were exposed. The world had become a frozen tomb. Logan opened his eyes to find frost on his eyelashes and Shadow breathing shallowly against his chest. The dog's fever still raged. His fur was damp with sweat despite the suffocating cold around them. Logan brushed a trembling hand along Shadow's flank. "I know, bud. I know, hold on." He fed the fire, coaxing tiny flames back to life. The heat spread slowly, barely enough to warm their corner. Logan's breath hitched as the railcar groaned again, this time from weight, not wind. Snow, tons of it, pressing down like an avalanche. He forced himself to stand, legs stiff, joints screaming. He pushed open the door a few inches. Snow poured inside instantly, blinding and bitter. Logan had to shove it closed again with all his strength. They were trapped. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal, fighting the rising panic. Shadow coughed behind him, a weak, rattling sound that cut straight into Logan's chest. "We're not dying in here," he whispered. "Do you hear me? Not like this." But as the hours crawled forward, the world went quiet again. Eerily, impossibly quiet. Not a single gust, not a single scrape of ice, the kind of silence that follows devastation. Logan stiffened. He recognized that silence. It was the same silence after an explosion overseas when the world held its breath before revealing what was left. He swallowed hard. "We have to check the outside." Shadow tried to stand, but collapsed halfway. Logan knelt and pressed a hand to the dog's side. "No, you stay. Save your strength." He layered extra cloth over the dog, then braced himself and shoved the door again, harder this time. It opened an inch, 2 inches. Finally, a blinding sheet of white cracked open just enough for him to slip through. The cold outside slapped him like a physical blow. Snow was everywhere, cascading down the railcar sides, piled high against the tracks, burying half the yard. He had to dig himself free of the doorway before he could climb on to the compacted snowbank. What he saw next stopped him cold. Figures, shadows moving through the storm. People, not just one or two, dozens, stumbling between drifts, arms wrapped around themselves, faces pale with cold and fear. Some carried children. Some dragged blankets behind them. All were shaking, and all were headed straight toward him. Logan stared in disbelief as the first group reached the railcar, the Harry's family, a couple who had once crossed the street to avoid him, the same woman who had clutched her purse tighter when Shadow trotted past one summer afternoon. Her face was blue, her eyes wild. Please, please, can we come inside? Our roof collapsed. The walls, they're gone. Everything's gone. Before Logan could answer, another voice cut through the frozen air. Brooks! Brooks! Help us! Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, people who had once slammed the door in his face when he'd asked for water, stumbled toward him, carrying their teenage son between them. The boy looked unconscious. Then more came. The Mason twins. Old Mrs. Carter. The lumberyard clerk who had pretended not to see him just 2 days earlier. Every face was familiar, and every face was filled with the raw terror of people who had run out of options. Logan's breath trembled, but then he saw the last group approaching. Caleb Morgan. The inspector struggled through waist-deep snow, holding his wife by the arm while a little girl clung to his back. His face, usually so rigid, so sure, was pale with desperation. When their eyes met, Caleb's voice cracked. Logan. He swallowed, choking on the cold. Our house collapsed. The whole south wall. We barely got out. Please. My kids. He broke off as the little girl whimpered. Logan felt Shadow's fevered breaths behind him, weakening by the minute. He looked at the crowd, at their trembling hands, their frostbitten cheeks, their chests rising and falling with panic. All the scorn, all the rejection, all the whispered judgments. They meant nothing now. Winter had stripped them bare, revealing the truth of every human heart. When death comes knocking, pride and prejudice fall silent. Logan took one breath, then another. The decision settled into him like a weight, but not a burden. A duty. Get inside, he said quietly. There was no anger in his voice, no triumph, only resolve. Everyone, move, now. They surged forward, not pushing, not fighting, just clinging to hope. Logan helped lift children through the doorway. He steadied the elderly. He pulled Caleb's wife up the step and guided the inspector inside without a word. Caleb paused at the threshold, guilt etched deeply into his frozen features. Logan. Inside, Logan said firmly. We'll talk later. Caleb lowered his head and climbed in. Logan followed last, pulling the door shut behind them as the storm howled and clawed at the railcar walls like a living thing denied its prey. Inside, 14 frightened souls huddled together, shivering, exhausted, terrified. And at the center of them all, Logan knelt beside Shadow, placing a gentle hand on the dog's side. You're not alone anymore, buddy, he whispered. No one in here is. The storm raged on outside, but inside the forgotten railcar, something powerful had taken root. Something warmer than fire, stronger than steel, and deeper than the frost that tried to break them. For the first time since winter began, hope belonged to all of them. But hope was a fragile thing, especially when stacked against a storm that wanted every last breath inside that railcar. As the door sealed shut, the final draft of wind died out behind it. 14 people now packed the narrow metal room, their bodies filling the space that once held only Logan and Shadow. Snow hammered the roof like a relentless drum, and the railcar creaked under the weight of it. Yet inside, lit by a single flickering fire, there was a heartbeat of life. Logan looked around. Faces he once passed in silence now watched him with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and something unfamiliar: trust. The Harris family huddled against a wall, their son coughing weakly. The Thompsons wrapped blankets around their boy's shoulders. Mrs. Carter muttered prayers under her breath. Caleb Morgan sat with his daughter on his lap, his hands trembling as he held her close. And at Logan's feet lay Shadow, still breathing, but shallowly. The dog barely lifted his head when Logan knelt beside him. "Stay with me," Logan whispered. Shadow blinked once, slowly. Inside the crowded space, panic threatened to rise like a tide. Logan could see it in their eyes. When people felt cornered, cold, and helpless, chaos followed. He knew this from experience. Battlefields weren't just overseas. He stood, steadying himself against the metal wall. "Listen up," he said quietly, but his voice carried. "This car is warm because we manage it right. If we panic, we lose heat. If we move too much, we waste strength. We're not going to let that happen." Every pair of eyes turned to him. "We're going to treat this like a unit. And we're going to get through the night. Together." There was silence at first, then a few nods, then more. Caleb lifted his gaze. "What do you need us to do?" Logan pointed toward the bedding he'd built. "We'll rotate people near the fire to keep everyone's temperature up. Kids first, elderly next." He gestured to the woodpile in the corner. "We burn fuel slow and steady, no big flames. We stretch what we have." Finally, he looked at the faces that had once shut their doors on him. "No one sleeps alone. Not tonight." The crowd moved, without question, without hesitation. Mothers handed children forward. Older men shifted to clear space. Mrs. Carter, who'd never spoken to Logan except to avoid him, placed her blanket against his arm. For the little ones," she murmured. Logan nodded once. "Thank you." Slowly, order replaced fear. Children curled beside the fire. Adults sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing body heat. Breath formed faint clouds in the dim light, and the storm outside roared like a beast trying to claw its way in. Hours passed. The temperature inside stayed barely survivable, thanks to careful tending, constant watching, and every scrap of fabric Logan had stuffed into the walls. But not everything held. Near midnight, the Thompson boy's coughing became ragged. His parents panicked, trying to wake him as his skin grew frighteningly pale. "He's freezing!" Mrs. Thompson cried. "Oh God, he's freezing!" Logan moved instantly. "Lay him down here." He knelt and placed a hand near the boy's face. Cold. Too cold. Shadow pushed himself upright, shaking, weak, but determined. He staggered toward them and pressed his warm body against the child. Logan covered them both with blankets, sealing in the little heat they had. Mrs. Thompson gasped softly as she watched Shadow curl protectively around her son. He's trying to save him." Logan nodded. His throat tightened. "He's always been like that." On the opposite side of the railcar, the Harry's youngest began to cry. A scared, trembling sound that filled the small space. The noise, the stress, the weight of the moment. It stirred something inside Logan's chest. A sound from the past. A memory. A battlefield child crying in rubble, flames in the sky, the taste of dust in his throat. His pulse spiked. His vision narrowed. The railcar walls squeezed inward. The sound of the storm twisted into mortar blasts, and the crackling fire became gunfire echoing off concrete. He gripped his knees. "Not now, please. Not now." His breath quickened. The room spun. The fire snapped loudly, and his heart thundered as though under attack. Then, A weight pressed against him. Shadow. Barely standing moments before, the dog now braced against Logan's leg. He lifted his head and pushed it firmly into Logan's hand, grounding him, pulling him back. The world steadied just enough for Logan to inhale. He closed his eyes, letting Shadow's presence pull him away from the edge. "Good boy," he whispered shakily. "I'm here. I'm here." Shadow let out a faint, tired whine, but he stayed beside Logan, refusing to lie down again until Logan's breathing had calmed. When Logan finally opened his eyes, he found the whole railcar watching him, quiet, respectful, suddenly understanding pieces they never had. He didn't explain, and they didn't ask. Outside, the storm shrieked with renewed force. Inside, the night grew quieter. People leaned on each other, literally, emotionally, spiritually, sharing fear, sharing warmth, sharing the truth that survival was no longer an individual task. Hours later, just before dawn, the littlest Thompson boy stirred. His color looked a shade better, his breathing steadier. His mother wept with relief, clutching his hand and Shadow's fur at the same time. Shadow, exhausted, laid his head down, but kept one paw resting across Logan's boot, as if to say, "I'm here. Still here." Logan looked across the railcar at the dozen souls who had once turned their backs on him. Tonight, they lived because he stayed. But he knew the truth just as deeply. He lived because Shadow stayed. The storm outside eased, just slightly, but it was enough to change the sound of the wind, enough for Logan to sense that dawn, faint and bruised, wasn't far off. He stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring consequences, questions, maybe hope. But tonight was quiet. And in that silence, the railcar didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a purpose. The storm's rage weakened somewhere in the late hours, fading from a roar to a distant, tired groan. By the time the first thin strand of daylight slid through the insulated cracks, the railcar was still standing, half buried in snow, creaking under the weight, but alive. Inside, 14 people slept in uneven clusters, their breaths rising in faint clouds. Some leaned against each other. Some lay slumped against crates or makeshift bedding. The Thompson boy, who'd nearly slipped away, rested with his head against Shadow's flank. Shadow didn't move, didn't so much as twitch, as if holding still was the last service he could offer. Logan eased himself up, joints stiff, lungs still thick with the cold, and peered toward the wagon door. He pressed his hand to it. The wood felt frozen solid, but no longer trembling with the wind's fury. "It's letting up," he whispered. Shadow lifted his head, weak but alert. Logan slowly unlatched the door and pushed. At first, nothing happened. Then snow cracked, shifted, and with a heavy groan, the door inched open like a vault releasing ancient air. A sheet of white spilled inside before Logan managed to brace it. He shoved harder until a gap big enough to squeeze through appeared. He stepped into a world made unrecognizable. The rail yard had vanished beneath towering drifts. Snow stretched across the open land like an ocean frozen mid-wave. Soft ridges and smooth blankets where fences, barrels, buildings once stood. Silence wrapped the landscape in a reverent hush. The storm was gone, but its mark was everywhere. Logan climbed atop the snow mound formed against the railcar, scanning the horizon. Smoke from chimneys was absent. No voices, no movement. The valley had been hit harder than anyone expected. Shadow poked his head through the doorway and whimpered softly. "I know, boy," Logan murmured. "We'll see what's left." Behind them, footsteps shuffled inside the railcar. "Is it over?" Mrs. Carter asked, her voice hoarse. Logan nodded. "Boys, girls, get your boots on. We need to check the town." One by one, groggy survivors gathered by the open door, staring out at the blank white. The Harris family gasped when they saw the collapsed roof of their home in the distance. The Thompsons spotted the remains of their shed, snapped in half like a twig. Caleb Morgan stood behind Logan, silent, his breath catching as he saw miles of buried tracks. "It's worse than I thought," he whispered. Logan didn't turn. Storms usually are. The townspeople looked at him differently now, not with fear, not with judgment, with gratitude, with respect, and with something deeper, acknowledgement. Caleb swallowed hard, snow crunching under his boots as he stepped forward into the daylight. "Logan, can I talk to you? Alone?" Logan slid down the snowbank, shadow following behind him. They walked a few paces from the railcar until only the wind listened. Caleb looked worn, not just from the storm, but from something older, heavier. He held a bundle of papers in his gloved hands, tied loosely with a frayed string. "I should have done this a long time ago," Caleb said quietly. "Before the storm. Before everything." Logan didn't respond, letting the man find his words. Caleb exhaled shakily and held out the papers. "This railcar, this land, it doesn't belong to the railroad anymore. Hasn't for decades. It was officially abandoned in 1978, but the paperwork got buried, lost, or maybe someone didn't want it found." Logan took the papers, brow furrowing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Caleb said, voice trembling with remorse, "that I threatened you with eviction over land you had more right to than anyone. And I did it because—" His throat tightened. "Because I judged you. Because I believed the worst rumors. Because I didn't bother to look deeper." Snowflakes drifted between them, sparkling in the renewed morning light. "You saved my daughter's life last night," Caleb whispered. "You saved all of us, and I don't know how to repay that. But I can start with the truth." Logan unfolded the top sheet, an official abandonment certificate stamped and dated, then maps, then a land release notice. It all pointed to one outcome. The railcar could be legally claimed through adverse possession. He looked up slowly. "You're giving this to me?" "I'm giving you what should have always been available," Caleb said. "And I'm going to file the claim myself, publicly. I'll stand before the whole town and tell them what you did, who you are." Shadow sat pressed against Logan's leg, breathing softly. From behind them, the Harry's boy shouted from the railcar door, "Mr. Brooks, the sun's coming out." More faces appeared, parents, children, smiling hesitantly, as if afraid the moment might disappear if they believed in it too much. Logan looked at them. People who once crossed the street to avoid him. People who whispered behind closed doors. People who'd shut him out into the cold. And now they looked at him like a man who mattered. Earl Dempsey appeared at the edge of the hill. His coat was torn, his hat missing, his face pale and pinched with cold. Relief flashed across his features when he saw the crowd, and then resentment when he saw Logan standing at the center of it. He approached with long, determined strides until he faced Logan head-on. "So it's true," Earl said, glaring. "You're the hero of the storm now." Logan didn't flinch. "I'm just a man who didn't walk away." Earl scoffed. "Well, I guess that makes you better than the rest of us, doesn't it?" Something in his tone made the townspeople step back. Caleb stepped forward. "Earl," he warned, "not now." Earl ignored him. "I heard there's talk of giving him permanent rights to this land. Is that right? Giving the veteran a prize?" "This isn't a prize," Logan said calmly. "It's a place to survive." Earl's eyes burned with a small, ugly fire. "You think you deserve it? After the trouble you've caused? After the scene you made?" Someone else cut him off. "Mrs. Carter." "We'd all be dead without him," she snapped. "Show some respect." The crowd murmured in agreement. Earl's expression faltered, just for a moment. Then he jabbed a finger toward Logan. This isn't over. You think one storm changes everything? People don't forget. Logan stared evenly at the man who had thrown him and Shadow into mortal cold. Maybe they don't, he said softly, but they can learn. Earl clenched his jaw, stepped back in retreat, and walked away, smaller than he'd ever looked. Caleb placed a hand on Logan's shoulder. Let's go tell the town what really happened here. The sun rose higher, warming the frozen rails with pale gold. Behind them, Shadow nudged Logan's hand gently, tail thumping once against the snow. Logan knelt down and pressed his forehead against Shadow's. We made it, he whispered. Because you stayed. The world was still buried. The storm had taken lives, changed families, rewritten the valley's memory. But hope, real hope, had roots now. It began in a forgotten railcar, and in the bond between a man and his dog. Tomorrow would bring questions, decisions, maybe a future. But today began with truth. The storm's aftermath settled over Red Valley like a second snowfall, quiet, heavy, full of things people had never dared say out loud. In the days that followed, the town worked to uncover frozen roofs, repair broken barns, and bury what the blizzard had taken. Yet through all of it, one place stood untouched by collapse, untouched by death. The railcar. People came in small groups at first, boots crunching over patches of ice, hats in hand. Some brought blankets. Others brought tools. Many came simply because they needed to see it, the place where their families had survived when everything else had fallen apart. Caleb Morgan kept his word. He stood on the steps of the courthouse 2 days after the storm, wind pressing at the edges of his coat, and declared before the entire valley, "The land is his, the railcar is his, and our gratitude is his." No one disagreed. Not after what they'd lived, not after the truth spread from family to family. How Logan had rationed heat, built fire systems from scrap, calmed panic, protected children, and held the line through nights when even hope froze. Logan didn't attend the announcement. Crowds still made him uneasy, but he heard the cheering from miles away, echoing across the valley like something carried by the wind. And he knew it wasn't really about him. It was about survival, about second chances, about people remembering the best parts of themselves after nearly losing everything. As winter loosened its grip, the world slowly turned from white to brown to green. Snow melted in thin ribbons that ran across the rail yard, revealing rusted tracks, warped metal, and earth that had been asleep for months. Logan began rebuilding, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. He fixed the railcar's warped door, reinforced the walls with salvaged beams, cut proper windows that let light spill inside like warm water. He sanded the floors, patched the roof, and built a small porch out of lumber donated by the Harris family. When he finished, the front steps looked almost like something from a postcard. Simple, sturdy, inviting. Shadow supervised it all. Though he walked more slowly now, and though his breathing was still heavy from the storm's sickness, the dog refused to rest for long. He followed Logan from plank to plank, lying nearby whenever Logan crouched to hammer or cut, tail thumping weakly whenever Logan glanced at him. "You're getting old," Logan said one afternoon, rubbing behind Shadow's ear. "But you're still tougher than most men I know." Shadow lifted his head proudly, as if he agreed. Neighbors drifted in and out of the rail yard offering help. Mrs. Carter brought fresh bread. The Thompson boy, fully recovered, brought nails and a handful of drawings he'd made of the storm. Caleb delivered lumber from the railroad's scrapyard, along with an apology every time Logan tried to thank him. "This isn't repayment," Caleb said firmly. "It's respect." Respect was something Logan had forgotten the shape of. The valley didn't just acknowledge him now. They sought him out. For guidance, for stories, for the steady presence that had once lived in silence at the town's edges. It wasn't long before tents popped up near the railcar, followed by small cabins built from donated wood. People who'd lost everything during the storm asked if they could stay while they rebuilt their own homes. Logan didn't turn anyone away. Soon, a cluster of structures formed around the railcar like a new heartbeat in the valley. Children ran between them in muddy spring boots. Smoke rose from chimneys. Tools clanged. Laughter replaced fear. And someone, no one remembered who, painted a sign and nailed it to a post near the tracks. Honor Haven, a place built by courage. Logan stared at the sign the first time he saw it. His name wasn't written anywhere on it. Neither was Shadow's. It didn't need to be. One warm April afternoon, Logan sat on the railcar porch with Shadow lying at his feet. The dog's muzzle more gray than black now. Children played in the field nearby, rolling between patches of leftover snow and new green grass as the sun dipped low over the mountains. "Mr. Brooks?" a small voice called. A girl no older than 9 stood at the porch steps, twisting the straps of her overalls. Her little brother hovered behind her. They both looked shy but determined. Can we pet Shadow?" she asked. Logan chuckled. "You can ask him." Shadow lifted his head, tail sweeping once against the wood, giving what could only be described as an approving grunt. The children erupted in giggles and rushed forward, burying their hands in his thick fur. Shadow endured it like a saint, closing his eyes as though he were soaking in sunshine. Logan watched the scene with a softness he rarely let himself feel. A few moments later, Caleb Morgan approached, hands in his pockets. "Town council is thinking of making this place official," Caleb said, "calling it a community sanctuary, a model for how folks should treat each other." Logan raised an eyebrow. "That right?" Caleb nodded. "All because of you." Logan shook his head. "Not because of me, because 14 people remembered how to stand together." Caleb smiled. "Well, you led that, whether you meant to or not." He turned to leave but paused. "Logan, about that storm, what you did, it changed people." Logan glanced down at Shadow, who blinked slowly in the golden light. "It wasn't just me," Logan said quietly. "I had help." Caleb followed Logan's gaze and his expression softened. "Yeah," he said. "I guess you did." Evening settled over Honor Haven, painting the cabins and railcar in warm amber. A breeze rolled down from the hills carrying pine and thawed earth. Shadow shifted, laying his head on Logan's boot, eyes half closed. "You saved me more times than I saved you," Logan murmured to him. "Truth is, I needed you far more than you ever needed me." Shadow's ear twitched. Children's laughter echoed. Tools clinked in the distance. And behind them, the railcar, once a cold shell in a forgotten yard, looked almost like a real home now. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Logan leaned back against the porch steps and let the quiet wash over him. Honor Haven wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a reward. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. A place built on courage, on forgiveness, on survival, and on the bond between a soldier and the dog who refused to leave his side. Logan rested his hand on Shadow's back, feeling the familiar rise and fall of his breath. "No one's useless," Logan whispered softly. "Not as long as they still know how to protect someone." Shadow lifted his head, pressed it against Logan's palm, and let out a deep, contented sigh. The porch light flickered on. Night settled warm and safe across Honor Haven, and for the first time in a very long time, Logan Brooks finally felt home. If this story touched you in any way, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're here with us, or type 0 if you just want to show Shadow some love. Your small comment helps this channel reach more people who enjoy stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and stay with us, because the next chapters of Logan and Shadow's journey are already on the way. I can't wait to share more stories with you.